So tonight on Another Thing About Tartan, I'm so pleased to welcome James MacSween right here in Edinburgh to tell us more about his Scottish heritage, his connection to haggis, and much, much more. So James, when it comes to haggis, you're the man in the know. You're the managing director of McSween of Edinburgh, a family company founded back in 1953 by Charlie and Jane MacSween. So can you tell us a bit more about the original McSween butcher shop?
Yes, certainly. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So the business was founded by my grandfather and Jean in 1953. It's quite a long story, but I'll try and keep it short. We're originally from Skye. 4 generations ago, my forefathers left Skye because they had a fallout with the laird or the landlord of the land that they had, and they moved to Ratho. Charlie lived in Ratho, and then when he was old enough to do his apprenticeship, he went and worked in a butcher shop in London, Links and Fife, as a bookkeeper. And he then finished his apprenticeship, and that was in the days where you lived with your employer and you paid your employer digs. So you paid for the privilege of doing your apprenticeship. He moved back to Edinburgh and got a job in a butcher shop on George Street, which is no longer there. It's now part of the Roxburgh Hotel, and that was called Oars on George Street. And between him starting there and him leaving Oars as the shop manager, he worked for a gentleman called Mr. Orr. Mr. Orr unfortunately died. His daughter, Mrs. Goodrum, didn't have the heart to run the business without her dad. She decided to sell the property to the SSEB, which is the Southern and Scottish Electricity Board. The lovely building got knocked down. They built this horrendous big building. That then got knocked down. It's now part of the Roxburgh. He ended up as a shop manager. He was away to look for another job as a manager in another butchery business. And between him and Mrs. Goodrum, they concocted this idea to set up on his own, and that's what he did in 1953. And we started trading on the 1st of August.
Oh, wow. We were also the 1st of August at this time.
There you go.
So an important day. Perfect. And then obviously lots has changed since the 50s, and your dad, John, took over the business in 1975. And am I right in saying he saw the opportunity to specialise in the manufacturing of haggis?
Yeah. So my grandfather died in 1975. My dad had been in the business since he was 17. He was born in 1939, so he certainly was a significant driving force in the business by then. But Dad saw that the need to diversify and to move into more wider manufacturing, I think is the way to put it. Yeah. We'd always had built up this great reputation for haggis and sausages and pies and all the products that we're selling, because in those days butcher shops also did a lot of food service, so they were supplying schools and restaurants and hotels. Okay. This is the days where Jenner's, you would go for lunch and it would be white linen tablecloths. Yeah. And if you happened to have the meat account at Woolworths, wow, you had made it, because the maitre d' would be there in his tails, and they would have an orchestra playing out in the corner. Okay. It is a different world to the way it is today. Yeah. So manufacturing is where you were able to add value and make profit more readily, because you weren't just buying in meat, butchering it, and then selling it on. You were actually taking cheaper raw materials. It's a bit like baking a cake. Haggis is like baking a cake. You buy in all the bits and pieces, and then voila, you have a finished cake.
Perfect. Yeah. So obviously it went then from being a local butcher shop in Bruntsfield to a national brand. So how did that play out then?
Well, that's taken a long time.
I can imagine.
I joined the business in 92, and between 92 and 96 we decided we were going to move out of high street butchery. In the early 80s, things called supermarkets started turning up. Yeah. And a Safeway opened just down the roads in Morningside, which is now a Waitrose, and instantaneously we saw a decline in sales. Right. Yeah. So the writing was on the wall, and we thought, right, we need to diversify. And back in the 80s, Dad really started exporting haggis into England, and that's not a joke. It was an export market as identified by, in its day, Scottish Enterprise. And we steadily built up this reputation for exporting haggis, pies, sausage, black pudding, you know, Scotch pies and Lorne sausage, all the stuff that we take for granted in Scotland was really sought after in England. So we'd already established quite a big export business, and by the time we moved to the new factory, which is not so new now, in 1996, you know, we were doing £750,000 in manufactured goods, and it was that kind of stepping stone that enabled us to become the household brand we are today, and that was by us getting our foot in the door with some of the supermarkets. You know, I talked about Safeway earlier. They were our first Burns listing. We had a 2-week contract with Safeway for Burns. Moved to the factory because we had a factory. We were able to manufacture to a different standard. We were able to be audited because we had a proper manufacturing layout. Then we picked up Costco and Tesco, and then we started picking up some other names. And slowly we've just picked up all the other retailers one by one.
Perfect. Easy as that.
As easy as that. I may look 50, but I'm actually only 21.
Oh, there you go.
It's been a rather hard paper round, let's put it that way.
I can imagine. And so growing up then, did you always think you'd go on to run the family company, or?
That's a great question. Yes, I always wanted to join the family business. I have always been fascinated with the manufacturing process. Fascinated by the equipment we use. You know, big shiny bits of kit worth tens of thousands of pounds has always fascinated me. And the whole pretext of we are literally making a haggis flavoured cake. We buy in all the bits and pieces. We buy in the meat, the oatmeal, the onions, the seasoning, and then we put our know-how into making something that to this day I do not get tired of eating. I love haggis, and I eat haggis at home at least once or twice a week. Even when we do taste panels, the thought, oh, haggis taste panel, it's fantastic. But that, as a child, coming into the butcher shop until we moved to the factory in 1996, you know, after school I would walk up to the shop and do my homework in the shop, and you know, I guess it was just it's an extension of our family. It was just another place that you would go. That's the beauty of a family business. But you would get to know the men, you'd get to know the process, you would be in working your holidays, you'd get paid holiday money, and it's just in my pores. And I knew very early on that I wanted to join. I probably joined a wee bit earlier than I planned. I was kind of between work when I'd fallen back into the business and helped mum and dad during holiday cover, etc., etc. And then there was a need, there was a vacancy in the business, because prior to that I'd only been on a kind of month-to-month contract. And Dad said, listen, there's a job for you in production, which is where I really wanted to work. I need to head up production. Do you fancy it? I was like, yeah, okay. And the rest is history.
Well, there you go. And so obviously your dad changed the business quite considerably from your grandparents. So is there anything you feel you've done to continue that change?
I would say that you know, I'm one of 4 siblings, so I've got myself and 3 sisters. One of my sisters did work in the business and left about 5 years ago. So I would say Joe joined just after me, and that's an important fact. I was there before Joe. And I would say that I was instrumental in being the next generation that came into the business, that I think gave my mum and dad the confidence to go, right, there's longevity in the business. Because if I hadn't joined, or Joe hadn't joined, if I hadn't joined, maybe Joe wouldn't have seen the interest. Oh, what's James up to? You know, it's that sibling rivalry. She's 4 years older than me, and that maybe there wouldn't have been the opportunity for her to join because I hadn't joined. Either way, mum and dad might have just sold the business as a going concern, and somebody would have bought it, and you know, it may still be in existence or it may not be. But I gave Dad the thought that, right, there's a business worth evolving here. We're gonna put some money into some bricks and mortar. We're gonna sell the shop. We're gonna build a factory, and I helped Dad and project managed that and did a lot of the heavy lifting to bring on the development of the factory, and he and I did a lot of this stuff together. But I certainly took a primary role in it. so that was, we built our factory, and then we built an extension a few years later, which enabled the facility to get bigger. So it's never over in in one go. But yeah, I think moving from a high street butchery shop into a mass manufacturer of scale is what I'm responsible for.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. And so obviously history and heritage and the family story are so kind of integral to your story. But how do you keep such a traditional product relevant then as times change?
Well, without changing the recipe, which we typically don't do. We play around with the recipe, but we have a haggis recipe that has only changed once in my lifetime,
right.
And that was after getting some feedback from a food critic called Derek Cooper. Thank you, Derek Cooper. And it's just about trying to make it relevant for today's generation. So the one of the most innovative products we created was haggis in a hurry, which was slices of haggis in a microwavable pack. We had been asked by one of our retailers to do a sliced haggis product. Okay, we can do that. But how do we make it, really innovative and not just more slices of haggis in a polystyrene tray? Yeah. So we spoke to our film manufacturer, and he went, well, let's go to our test facility in called Pack Forum, which is just outside Charles de Gaulle Airport. So we went to this facility where they had machines, and they had slicing machines and packing machines and all sorts of bits of kit. And we started running some slices of haggis down this machine, and it was just standard film that you would see smoked mackerel and called skin pack. And he says, "Oh, I think we've got some film that you can actually cook in the pack." And we're like, "Oh, that's interesting. Right, let's get this on the machine and run it." And then instantaneously we thought, we've got a product here that really is innovative. And in this test facility, they had a cooking facility, and the microwaves had infrared cameras in it. So you could actually see the product cooking in the microwave at the same time. So 2 slices of haggis. The reason that they are that thick is because it took 60 seconds to cook them. So haggis in a hurry, 130 grams of haggis cooked in 60 seconds. No piercing, no peeling, no fuss. And a new product was born in 2009. So I think it's about making sure that your products are relevant, that haggis is a very traditional dish, typically eaten by a traditional audience, and we need to make sure that there's another generation of haggis eaters is really appreciating Scotland's national dish. And whether it's innovative products like haggis in a hurry, or changing the pack size, or making the price more attractive, or putting full-blown photography on our label to show that it should be used as a protein to make meals rather than just eaten with neeps and tatties is a way of trying to keep it relevant.
Ah, well, there you go. I'm a very big fan of the haggis in the hurry, I must say. If you're not sure what you're having for dinner, then that's it. Yeah, it's done then. So
very versatile.
Definitely. And so did you celebrate your Scottish roots and culture from a young age then, obviously eating such a traditional dish?
Well, it's hard. You kind of shy away from being Scottish when you make Scotland's national dish, which, as I said, is an iconic food dish, like whiskey, shortbreads and smoked salmon. So I'm a very proud Scot, but I call myself British. I love wearing the kilt. I love tartan. I love everything that Scotland has on offer. If I had my time again, I would learn to play the bagpipes. I really appreciate Burns. I really appreciate Scottish poetry and our culture as Scots. And I think as a nation we've got so much to offer in such a small space. I do travel quite a bit into the USA and Canada, and typically people are in awe of what we have on offer. Oh my God, I love Scotland. Oh, the people are so friendly. Oh, it's so beautiful. I think sometimes we don't actually appreciate what we've got on our own doorstep.
No, you always appreciate it more once you step out.
Absolutely.
Like you say, especially in North America. You just feel honoured because they love us so much. So, Yeah, and so then the McSween family, are they linked to a particular clan then? Do you wear a specific tartan?
Yeah, so the McSweens, my understanding, and I would love to hear feedback otherwise, we're a very small clan. As I said earlier, we're from Skye. We lived in my forefathers lived in Upper Edinburgh, which is kind of in the middle, and that's where my forefather's croft was. And we've always worn the McQueen tartan because the McSweens are a sept of the clan McQueen. That's certainly the tartan I wear when I'm wearing the kilt. Now, we were chatting earlier about other kilts. My mum's a Mackay, so I've worn a Mackay tartan. My dad's first kilt was a hunting Fraser because he liked it. But more readily, my dad and I have always worn McQueen. We use the tartan for displays, and we've got a sofa in the factory that's covered in McQueen tartan. Yeah,
cool.
I love it. It's really striking, black, red, and yellow, and probably infamous because of Alexander McQueen, the designer, and Victoria Beckham and Sarah Jessica Parker for wearing it.
Yeah, I know. Certainly, a small clan has been seen worldwide thanks to him. So, yeah. Perfect. And I like it, as I was saying, I'm part of the Wallaces, so it's very similar. I imagine it gets misrepresented as the Wallace from time to time.
It does. So there's the face mask I was wearing today, which started a conversation. So they are very similar. Yeah. Just that the set is slightly different, but it's a very striking tartan, and typically starts a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I can imagine it will. You were saying earlier that you often wear a kilt to go to meetings.
Yeah. I don't typically. I don't wear a suit anymore. I wear a kilt for meetings with customers, and I think that they've learned to appreciate it. A lot of people stop me and go, "Is that the Wallace tartan?" So the Wallace must be a bigger clan than the McQueens.
Yeah, I think so.
And you just politely say, no, it's very similar, but this is the McQueen.
Well, I think with the Wallaces, William Wallace is such a prominent figure that they were always bound to be quite a big clan. So, yeah. So before we go much further, I really must admit that I'm actually vegetarian. So speaking to you about haggis has brought much joy to the rest of the Scotland Shop team. But luckily for me, your dad was the inventor of the first vegetarian haggis back in the 80s, and I heard that was to honour the opening of the Scottish Poetry Library.
That's correct.
So was that quite controversial at the time then?
Yes, I guess it was. So the curator of the library approached my dad and said, "We're having this opening, I'd like to have some haggis. I'd also like to have some vegetarian haggis." And my dad kind of scratched his head going, I beg your pardon. "Well, I'm sure you can knock something up, John. One of my daughters will come up and help you because a lot of our family are vegetarian." It was like, okay. So if I remember right, this was in the spring that the opening of the library was, and Dad pulled the recipe together. And back in the 80s, we didn't have, I guess plastic wasn't as common as it is these days.
Yeah.
I know for some of your listeners that might be difficult for you to understand, but refuse sacks used to be made out of paper, not black plastic.
Yeah.
So Dad thought, well, what am I going to put this big haggis in? So we put it in a sheep's stomach, as you would put all ceremonial haggis that you would use at the opening of a building or a burnt supper. Right. And the opening of the library came and went, and the haggis attracted as much attention to the opening of the library. Well, maybe the creator was actually onto something and said, right, I want to create a media stunt. Let's have a vegetarian haggis at the opening of this library. Anyway, it worked, and we donated money to the opening of the library. But then Dad started receiving letters. "I've read in the newspaper you do a vegetarian haggis. Where can I buy it?" And says, "Well, thank you very much for your letter. We don't actually sell it." But when he got enough letters, my dad being a serial entrepreneur was like, "I think there's a product in this."
Yeah.
And by the August, he'd created this recipe. Now it wasn't quite as simple as that, because the recipe that he made for the opening of the library isn't the recipe that we make to this day.
Right.
And to get a one-off recipe into something that's can be commercially manufactured is quite a chasm to leap. He knew what he roughly wanted to put into it, but we just couldn't get the flavour right. And despite how many recipes we tried, he just couldn't figure out what the missing element was. And we tried different fats, so margarines, butters, oils, palms, suets, all vegetarian or plant-based or vegan, and they were all pretty filthy. And then he brought one home one day, and we were like, "My God, that's it, Dad! That is amazing! What have you done?" He went, "Right, I'm proving a concept. It's the fat that's letting the recipe down. We need to find the right fat." I went, "Well, use this one." He went, "Well, that's beef fat. We can't use that." But the point he was trying to make was, right, if we can get the fat element right, I think we've nailed the recipe. So he then found a vegan cake margarine, which we then used, which had the same characteristics as beef fat, and that's the recipe we launched in 1984.
Well, there you go. Like I say, I mean, when I was very young, I will have had meat haggis, but for about 17 years I've been vegetarian. So to me, that's the haggis I know. So and meat eaters appreciate it too, because when Dad created it, he really thought creatively as to how do we recreate that meaty texture and mouthfeel that you get from eating a haggis, and we've done that by the way we chop and blend the raw materials that go in. Now, the original one that you will have first eaten used to have nuts in it, but these days you talked about how do you keep a product relevant. Well, we took nuts out of it in 2012. Now we replaced the nuts with sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds, which still gives the bite, and even that was a task in itself to how do we maintain the bite that we get from the nuts, but we eventually overcome that problem too. But I'm delighted you like it. It's a huge part of our sales. We sell 60% of all the vegetarian haggis in the UK. Oh wow.
It's about 25% of our haggis sales, so it is very popular. And we went vegan from day one. It's approved by the Vegetarian and Vegan Society. We're bringing out a gluten-free vegetarian haggis, which should be in the shops beginning of next year, because that's something else that people have been asking for, is a gluten-free one, because we brought out a gluten-free haggis a few years ago.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, perfect. So then in 2020 you began exporting the vegetarian haggis into the US, but I remember it being in the papers because you've renamed it Scottish Veggie Crumble.
That's correct.
Can you tell us a bit more about why you adjusted the name then?
Yeah. So vegetarian haggis is a bit of an oxymoron. It's a contradiction. There are a lot of people, when you use the word haggis, it's like Marmite. It's like, oh my God, I don't like haggis. The number of tasting shows that we've done tasting. Would you like to try some haggis? No, I don't like haggis. Oh, have you ever tried haggis? No, but I know I won't like it. So it has this reputation of not being something that people appreciate. So when you go to America, and where they've only really heard the bad stuff about haggis, it's like pushing water uphill. Let's not call it vegetarian haggis. Let's call it something that is a more international name, and call it something which is more akin to what they're used to. And crumble and veggie crumble is a product that's more commonly found in Canada and the United States.
Okay.
So I know that for us a crumble is something you would have with custard, and it's usually got apple and rhubarb in it. But out there they make a lot of veggie crumbles, and the plant-based or the alternative protein category is far more a maturer market than it is here. We're in the last 18 months. Plant-based has really caught on. You now get a plant-based section in supermarkets, but they've got very extensive ranges of plant-based protein in America. They probably dedicate as much space to that as they do what we do in the UK on sausage, for example.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's big.
Yeah, there you go. And do you think they'll ever let meat haggis in?
I've been told they will. I had the privilege of going to the States with Richard Lockhead, who was the Cabinet Secretary for Food and Rural Affairs back in 2015, and we went to various meetings with USDA and that's the United States Food and Drink Administration, APHIS, which is the Animal Plant Health Inspection. These are the people that will allow the regulations to be changed, and they are going to admit lamb and beef exports, and a part of that haggis. The lamb and beef thing is if it hasn't already happened, it's nearly happened on getting lamb and beef into the States. Certainly they've got lamb and beef into Canada, which was a part of that same trade mission. Okay. We've been exporting haggis to Canada since 2017. Okay. It will happen. The change of administration with Trump becoming president delayed things. Okay. Because all the heads of each of those areas, like the USDA, resigned when the president left. They then have to backfill these positions. Now we've got another new president, so it'll be delayed even further. Yeah. But we are, the Scottish Government Food and Drink Team and QMS, Quality Meat Scotland, they are making progress. It's just taking a bit of time. So at least there are establishments that once haggis has been approved for sale in the United States, I can now buy the raw materials, because that's a part of the process. And that's how we do it in Canada. We buy meat from establishments that are approved by the Canadian Food and Drink Administration. So I buy from those sites, I then turn it into a haggis, then I export the haggis. So it's all about the red tape and the export health certificates. Really boring stuff.
Well, yeah, it's always caused a bit of controversy, hasn't it? So fingers crossed.
But yeah, we will get there.
Yeah, I'm glad you're leading the way to make that happen. And so what would you say to encourage anyone who is a bit unsure about trying haggis to convince them to give it a go?
I promise you, it's just like spicy mince or spicy ground lamb and beef. Make sure it's a Mcsween, that's one caveat. Make sure it's a Mcsween. You will not be disappointed. I would say have it initially with neeps and tatties or potatoes and turnip. Or rutabaga for the Canadians and Americans out there, and you will not be disappointed. It's tasty, it's satisfying, it's fulfilling, and it's really homely as a foodstuff. And if you want to be a bit more adventurous, have it on toast with baked beans, or put it in a jacket potato. It's incredibly versatile, and you can eat it with almost any meal of the day, but just give it a try. It's proper tasty.
There you go. Well, like I say, I'm leading the way for the vegetarian, but I have to agree. So obviously, like we were just saying, it's traditionally served with neeps or turnips and tatties, potatoes, but your website is absolutely full of recipe ideas. So what's your personal favourite way to serve it?
Well, we do eat a lot. I've got two sons, and they both love haggis. My wife is a little bit like you, prefers vegetarian. Yeah. So we eat a lot of haggis for tea with neeps and tatties and a bit of whiskey cream sauce. But for breakfast, we have it on toast with baked beans, or we do it with toasted cheese and mango chutney.
There you go. I'll have to give that one a try.
Yeah, very tasty.
Oh, perfect. And so we are filming actually just a few days before Christmas, although we're not going to put this live until closer to Burns Night, but this year I'm actually looking forward to using one of your very own recipes, the vegetarian haggis Wellington, for my Christmas dinner. So I have to thank you for putting all these recipes out into the world. So
pleasure.
Yeah.
The beauty of haggis is, and it goes back to your other question, how do you keep a product relevant? It's about showing the versatility of the product. Yeah. If you consider our haggis, vegetarian haggis, as a source of protein, whether it's plant-based or meat-based, to give you a wider repertoire of meals, you can use it in next to anything. I was having soup for lunch the other day while I was working at home. And I thought, I'm really hungry. Oh, there's some leftover haggis. So I just dropped some leftover haggis in my bowl of minestrone soup, and it just, beefed it up a bit. For breakfast, with eggs for lunch, nachos, burritos. Yeah. There's a burrito bar down in Leith called Los Cardos, which is a regular stomping ground of Irvin Welsh, of train spotting ink, and they've called it the Irvine Welsh. It is endless. I think probably your imagination is what limits the amount of ways you can eat haggis and vegetarian haggis.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Yeah, I like nachos as well. It's always a good one. So tell us then, what makes a good haggis? Then why is it so popular? And is it something people could make at home then, or is it actually very complicated?
You can make it at home. There's lots of people making haggis on YouTube. It's a good place to have a look if you want to try and make a haggis. It's very, I would say it's quite labour intensive to make a haggis. You'd probably take as much time to make one in your house than we could make a ton in our factory. I think the thing to remember is consistency.
Okay.
My grandfather always used to talk about a Mars bar haggis. You know what a Mars bar is going to taste like before you put it in your mouth, and it's important that when you're producing the volume of haggis that we are, that it's consistently the same, because that's what consumers expect. Start with great ingredients, take your time, put a lot of love or care into the preparation of it. If you're making it at home and it says finely dice your onions, then finely dice your onions, because if it's garbage in, garbage out. But we buy raw materials to an exacting standard, and we have a very defined manufacturing process, and we taste panel our products every week, so we know that we're consistently making a good product. But yeah, I would say consistency and buying the best ingredients you can.
I think that it all makes sense, doesn't it? So. Yeah, and obviously we've been chatting a bit about people not being sure about haggis and hearing some horror stories. So there's always been this myth and legend about exactly what haggis is, where it comes from. So maybe you can clear some of that up for us. There is
quite a lot of mystique about haggis. Is it an animal that's got one leg short on the other and runs around the hill one way, and the haggis catchers run the other way and catch them in the net? No, haggis are made, they're not reared. Haggis is Scotland's national dish. Haggis either came to Scotland via the Vikings or the Romans, so it's been here for an awful long time. There's reference to it in a cookbook going back to the time of King Richard II, called A Form of Curry, where he talks about something that is chopped and stuffed into a casing. Equally, that could be a sausage. But the haggis became famous because of Robert Burns. It's been eaten for years, but if Burns hadn't written to a haggis, then haggis may have been owned by Shakespeare, because he could equally have done an ode to a haggis. But we have Burns to thank for it becoming Scotland's national dish and making it famous by writing to a haggis.
Well, yeah. And obviously for most companies, Christmas is probably going to be their busiest time of year. But like you say, haggis is well associated with Burns Night, and especially because of his address to the haggis. So is that your busiest time of year then? Yeah,
Burns, the month of January is a very busy time for us. We do a third of our annual turnover. We're a very seasonally focused business, because haggis is typically eaten in the colder months of the year, so we do half our turnover in November, December and January. So right now we are busy. Getting ready for Christmas is a busy time. People are eating at home. They would normally be having friends round for maybe hogmanay and having a bit of haggis. So this year is slightly different because of the COVID restrictions, but we also make huge amounts of black pudding. So we're very, very busy doing big runs on black pudding, because more people are going to be at home having cooked breakfast probably this New Year and Christmas than ever before. It's a busy time for any food business, but we buck the trend by being busy in January.
Yeah, well, everyone thinks we would be quiet as well in January, but Tartan, again, people need that for Burns Night, so you don't get that break after Christmas. So and so obviously we're talking about the address to the haggis, so have you had to recite it on many an occasion then? Are you
I remember learning at a very young age. My dad got asked to go to a lot of burn suppers to address the haggis. I equally have gone to a lot of burn suppers to address the haggis. I make a rule I only address my own haggis though.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I got asked to a burn supper once, and I'd heard about the burn supper, and I knew that they weren't using our haggis, so I said, and it will be McSween's haggis you'll be having. Oh no, it's somebody else's. I says, well, you know, unless you buy my haggis, I'm sorry, I'm going to decline on addressing the haggis. Fortunately, they then went and procured McSween haggis. So yeah, I love, like I said, I love burns. I love the address the haggis. You know, tam o'shanter is something that I've been learning more recently, which is a more of an epic.
I was going to say it's quite lengthy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite lengthy, but equally a fantastic story about tam. Yeah, drunken tam.
Yeah. Well, we're launching a Burns poetry competition throughout January, so I think you're going to have to give us an entry for that. You can come back to me on that.
I'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah, once you've learnt tam o'shanter, then yeah, I look forward to hearing it. So obviously, usually you would be visiting many Burns nights, I imagine, but how are you going to celebrate this year then, with everything being a little different?
It will be a little different. We'll just be at home having haggis, steeps and tatties with my wife and boys, which we typically, whether I was going to burn suppers or not, we would still have haggis at home, because we are quite fanatical about eating our haggis.
Yeah.
Like I said, we typically eat it every week, because we genuinely love it, and my boys are so enthusiastic about haggis, which is fantastic. I think if Charlie had his way, he would have haggis every morning for breakfast.
Really? Okay.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
We have to limit him.
Okay.
We have to limit him to haggis in a hurry only twice a week.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So do you think he'll lead the next generation of McSweens then?
I don't think Charlie will come in. I think my younger son George is more interested in joining the business.
Okay.
Yeah, he's I'd like to do what Daddy does.
Oh, that's good.
I think Charlie wants to be a doctor or a teacher. So.
Oh, well, still a good
Well,
profession.
his auntie's a doctor, my wife's a teacher, so I think he's
okay.
aspiring to higher things.
I like it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then his love of haggis might take over.
It
you
might.
never know. So, yeah. And as we were discussing earlier, then shipping haggis internationally is quite a complicated business. But for all our listeners who are further afield, then where can they get their hands on your product?
If right now, if you want to try our Scottish Veggie Crumble, that's available in a couple of stores in New York, Fairway and Morton Williams, and then if you're in Texas, of all places, it's in Central Market. If you're in Canada, you should be able to pick it up in the GTA, the Greater Toronto area. There are some other bits and pieces available through in British Columbia. But if you want to go to our website, www.macsween.co.uk, there's links on our website to the people we work with in Canada and in the United States.
Perfect, that's great. And I think everyone here in Scotland knows how to get their hands on it, but just in case they don't, where should they go here?
Any major retailer, some of the big high street names. So the big supermarkets will have haggis in for January. Certainly M&S and Waitrose, we make all haggis for Waitrose, and we also make all the haggis and black pudding and vegetarian haggis for M&S. So if you've got one of those stores, but Booths, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Co-op, you name it, it'll be there.
Long list, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, James. I really enjoyed finding out more about the McSweens and haggis, and maybe clearing up some of the mystery along the way. So I hope you have a wonderful Burns night.
Thank you very much.
Maybe a little quieter than usual for you. And I also hope we've encouraged a few more people to give haggis a try.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed getting involved and helping you demystify the haggis.
Perfect. Well, thank you.
Pleasure.
That's great. Okay.